So hello and welcome to Veggies for the Rogue Valley, presented by Jackson County Library Services. I'm Carrie Tannehill, Adult Services Librarian. So the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Jackson County Library Services. So today's presenter is Master Gardener Ronnie Budge. Ronnie, thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm going to give it over to you as you tell us what veggies grow best. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Carrie, and thank you all for being here today. I would suggest that you change from gallery view, if that's the way you have your screen, to speaker view in order to see me the best, but also I'll be demonstrating some ways to sow seeds and to transplant seeds, and you'll get the best view of that if you use the speaker view. It'll be the largest screen for you. So I hope that you have received two documents. One is called So You'd Like to Start a Vegetable Garden, and the other one is called The Best Veggies for the Rogue Valley. Carrie said that she forwarded them to everybody, and you can print them out if you'd like. And if you didn't get them, I suggest you contact Carrie and ask her to email those to you. Everybody seems to want to garden, especially this past year. Somehow with the pandemic, people were staying home, and gardening turned out to be just the perfect thing to do when being home and wanting something to occupy those hours. It's a great thing to do with children. It's a whole family activity that everybody can enjoy. And last year, seeds were in short supply, and little veggie starts for transplanting were in short supply. Hopefully this year that won't be as much of a problem. So there are lots of good reasons for gardening and for growing vegetables. And I always pose the question, why would you want to do it in the Rogue Valley, especially where we have growers markets most every day of the week, and you can buy fresh vegetables there, about as fresh as you can get, unless, of course, you're picking them out of your own garden. And if you are, that's even fresher. Sometimes you'll want to grow a particular variety that you especially enjoy. You can control the way that you grow them. If you want to grow organically and ensure that you have absolutely the healthiest vegetables for the best nutrition, you can do that. You might want to grow some hard to find varieties that you cannot get in other ways. As I said, it's a great thing for the whole family, but be aware that you probably will not be able to save any money unless you have a very large garden and a lot of people working on it. You can't really save money because of the various inputs that you have, the fertilizer needs, the water needs, and so forth. But just having fun overrides that concern. So I'd like to review some of the basics of vegetable gardening. First of all, what should you grow? You should grow what you like to eat. Kale is very trendy. We know it's nutritious, but if you don't like to eat it, don't grow it because you won't eat it. There's no point in wasting space on things that you don't like to eat. You must have between 8 and 12 hours of sunshine if you're going to grow vegetables that bear fruit. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, corn, all of those kinds of things need lots of sunshine. But if all you have is a shady area, don't give up, because there are lots of things that you can grow in areas with more shade. They need a little sunlight, but not necessarily 8 hours a day. The greens, for example, lettuce, kale, spinach, can do well with some shade. And in fact, in the summertime, those vegetables will probably do better. If you try growing them where there's lots of sunshine in the summer, you probably need to add a little bit of shade cloth to give them a little shade, because it will be just too hot for them. So there's always something that you can grow, whatever kind of circumstances you have. Think about the space that you have available. If you don't have a whole lot of space, you're not going to want to grow corn, because that takes up an awful lot of space for a rather limited harvest. And we always advise, if you're starting off with vegetable gardening, to start small. If you're going to grow in raised beds, 3 raised beds that are about 4 feet by 8 feet, is about 100 square feet altogether. And 100 square feet is a nice size beginning garden. I would recommend that you start with about 100 square feet if you haven't done this before or aren't an experienced vegetable gardener, because you'll have more success if you don't have a big garden to contend with. And once you have that success, you'll want to keep going. Also, when you think about what you want to grow, and especially if you don't have a whole lot of experience, grow the vegetables that are easiest to grow. This handout, the best veggies for the Rogue Valley, are the vegetables that I think are easiest. There are exactly 24 mentioned here. I am far from the world's best vegetable grower. I'm a master gardener, but one is always learning when one's a master gardener, or any kind of gardener. And I'm not as good a gardener as many other individuals that I know. And that's why I can say, if you try these 24 vegetables, you're most likely to have success, because I think they are the easiest to grow in the Rogue Valley. One of the things that I want to explain very clearly is the difference between cool weather and warm weather vegetables. This was a hard concept for me when I first started gardening. I grew up in the big city, and you could go to your local vegetable store any time of the year and find most any kind of vegetable. And actually, that's pretty much true now with the big supermarkets we have. Tomatoes are available all year round. Most vegetables, maybe not melons in the wintertime, but most vegetables you can find almost year round. But the warm weather vegetables have been imported from South America, maybe, in the wintertime to the Rogue Valley. So if you're not actually gardening, you may not think so much about what will grow well in what season of the year. So let me bring up a little list of the vegetables that I want to screen share. I trust you can all see that. If you can't, somebody shout out, but hopefully that's good. So this is a list of the vegetables that grow well in cool weather. It's mostly the green vegetables like spinach, like mustard greens, like Swiss chard, like collards and kale and lettuce and escarole. Those do well in the wintertime. They can certainly stand light freezes like we have in the early fall or in the early spring. Also, the root vegetables, carrots, radishes, turnips, beets, those also grow well in the cool weather. And cool weather, what we mean in the Rogue Valley is from January to about April. Even into May, if you've sown something earlier, it certainly should last through May. Now, the exception to the leafy greens and root vegetables as cool weather crops are peas. Even though they are producing seeds, which is what we eat, they are a cool weather vegetable as compared with beans, which are certainly related to them, but beans are warm weather crops, peas are cool weather crops. And the traditional day for sowing peas in the Rogue Valley is President's Day, sort of mid-February, although I have sown as early as January for peas. And we are about at the limit of the time when you can sow peas. If you really want peas, get them in the ground today, because once hot weather starts, they stop producing. And also there is a virus called pea innation that likes warm weather and it attacks peas and will spoil the crop once the warm weather comes. Now, warm weather vegetables are those that bear fruit or seeds, things like peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, squash, cucumbers, melons, beans, both bush beans and pole beans. The way that you tell when it's time to plant a cool weather or a warm weather crop or vegetable isn't just the air temperature. It isn't simply a case of whether it's going to be freezing in the next few days or whether it's going to be warm in the outside, 70 degrees versus 50 degrees or 32 degrees. But it's also the soil temperature. And you need a soil thermometer. This is one kind of soil thermometer. There are other kinds. Some of them look like a candy thermometer. They have a flat dial on the top. And what you do to determine the best time to sow or transplant is to push this down into the soil, wait a few minutes, push it up, bring it up again, and see what the soil temperature is. The soil temperature does not vary much throughout the day. It changes more week to week, unlike the air temperature. But it is important to know what the soil temperature is in order to determine the right time to either sow or to plant or transplant your vegetables. The question is, how do you know what soil temperature you should have for what vegetables? And there are several ways to find that out. I'm going to recommend to all of you that you try and get a copy of this garden guide for the Rogue Valley year-round and month-to-month. This is produced by the Jackson County Master Gardener Association, and it has all the information you could possibly want about growing vegetables in the Rogue Valley, including a chart that shows the optimal soil temperature for growing most any vegetable. Another option is the territorial seed catalog. And I hope you will try and get a copy of this. If you go online to the Territorial Seed Company website, you can tell them you want them to send you a catalog, and they most likely will. And in a few minutes, I'll show you a typical page in this catalog that explains a lot about growing vegetables, including the optimal soil temperature. So, where should you locate your garden? Here in the Rogue Valley, I think the most important thing to think about is a ready water supply. Especially this year with the drought we're having, we're all aware of how important water is. And this spring we're getting no water, but in a typical year, there is no water from about mid-May all the way through September and halfway into October. So one way or another, you need to water. How you water will be an issue for you to decide. You can use a hose or a watering can and hand water everything that you grow. That is very satisfying, but it's kind of hard to stand there for long enough to make sure that your plants, and particularly the roots, are getting enough water. Another option is some kind of drip system or soaker hoses, and those work very well. They conserve water. They're really the most efficient method for watering your plants, but they do require some time and effort in figuring out how to do those soaker hoses and the drip irrigation system. Another option is an overhead sprinkler, say an oscillating sprinkler that just goes back and forth and back and forth. That's okay. It's what I do because it is the simplest method. And the disadvantage is that the water on the foliage can attract diseases, particularly funguses. So to avoid that as best you can, it's very important, whatever system of watering you're using, it's very important to water in the morning. And I set my sprinkler to go on at 4 or 5 in the morning and turn off at 8. I had an automatic timer, obviously. Turn off at 8 in the morning, which was about when I was going to go down and work in the garden. And that gave all the rest of the day for that water on the foliage to dry off. Oftentimes, you will see plants that are wilting in the middle of the afternoon, especially tomatoes in the summertime. Do not water in the middle of the afternoon. It sure looks tempting, but those vegetables sort of shut down. Tomatoes after 90 degrees in air temperature just shut down completely, and they cannot absorb that water. And all you're doing is driving out the oxygen in the soil. So at least wait until the evening, see if they're still wilting, then you may want to take a hose and water around the base of the plant without getting water on the foliage. Otherwise, wait until the morning and see how those plants look. Another consideration, as I mentioned earlier, is whether you will have enough sun where you want to put your garden. Another consideration is whether it's a level area. Level is best, but you can always terrace if it's on a slope. And the good advice is to have your garden as close to the house as you can. All other things being equal, it's very convenient to just be able to step out the door and pick what you want for your evening's dinner. The next question is, are you going to have your garden in the ground, or are you going to use raised beds, or are you going to grow in pots? And there are lots of big containers that you can put on a deck or a balcony, and lots of different varieties nowadays that are bred especially for growing in containers. So if you don't have a good garden, big garden area, certainly don't give up on gardening, do it in pots. If you do your garden in the ground, you will have to clear it of weeds and of rocks, and you will have to add amendments to your soil. You'll have to add organic matter, something like aged sawdust or well-rotted manure or leaf mold or chicken manure or grass that has dried and is well aged, or compost. And you can buy compost or you can make your own compost, and that's probably the very best soil amendment of all. But whether you have clay soil or sandy soil, the solution to either one is adding organic matter. Make sure you've got lots of organic matter in your garden. Another option, and one that we really recommend, is to garden in raised beds. These can be just a mound of soil without any sides, or you can make beds that have wooden sides or cement blocks for sides. And there's going to be a class offered by the library, a virtual class like this, that will be taught by one of our master gardeners named John Coble. He does a wonderful presentation about raised beds, and you can learn far more about it by attending that particular class. But the advantages of those raised beds are that you can add soil to it. You can buy soil and have it installed in the raised bed, and then you can continue to maintain that very good soil. You don't walk on it, so that helps keep the tilt, keeps it from compressing. If you have a high raised bed and you can have them off the ground, you don't need to bend as far in order to garden. The soil in raised beds dries out sooner and warms up sooner in the spring, so you can usually plant in it sooner than you can if you're planting in the ground. And you can locate it anywhere. You can put a raised bed on top of cement or asphalt as long as you have drainage out of that raised bed. So lots of advantages to it. We certainly recommend that you strongly consider gardening in raised beds. Wherever you garden, the soil is the most important thing for a good garden, and that's why we emphasize having lots of organic matter, whether it's in the ground or the raised bed or in containers that you have on your deck or balcony. Particularly going back to watering, if you're growing your vegetables in pots, you're going to make sure that they get lots of water, because soil in pots dries out very quickly. The other thing that you may need to do when you take care of your soil and when you plant is to fertilize. And I'm going to suggest that when you're starting off, you just buy a bag of fertilizer like this, vegetable and tomato fertilizer. We recommend that it be organic. I'm going to show you about how to judge what kind of fertilizer you might need. Every bag of fertilizer somewhere, and in this case, it's kind of hidden on the side panel. It says 253. Every bag of fertilizer or bottle of fertilizer, if it's a liquid fertilizer, will have 3 numbers on it somewhere. And let me show you what those numbers mean. I'm going to screen share again. Okay. These numbers represent the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in the fertilizer, abbreviated as NPK. These are the symbols for those particular elements in the periodic table. And each of those is one of the essential elements that all plants need. And notice that they are in alphabetical order, which is an easy way to remember: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, NPK in alphabetical order on the package. Now, what do these do? The N, the nitrogen, helps support the green parts of the plants, the part growing above ground. The phosphorus helps support the roots, but also the flowers. And then the potassium is for the overall health of the plant. So the way that you remember this, the mnemonic device, is up, down, and all around. Those 3 numbers on the fertilizer represent the percentage of those elements by weight, whether it's a granular dry fertilizer or whether it's a liquid fertilizer. It is the percentage of that element by weight. And usually the low numbers on a bag of fertilizer will mean that it's organic, and the higher numbers are usually not organic. They are synthesized. Particularly the nitrogen is synthetic nitrogen. So what I just showed you was a Job's organic vegetable and tomato plant food. That was 253. It's derived from bone meal, which provides the phosphorus, processed poultry manure, which provides the nitrogen, and sulfate of potash, which provides the potassium. Now here is another bag of also tomato and vegetable food. Notice that it has higher numbers. It's still, 4, 10, 6 with the phosphorus being the higher number. But this time it's derived from these chemicals: ammonium phosphate, ammonium sulfate, and muriate of potash. Notice that it's the middle number, the phosphorus. In both cases, that's the highest number. That's because this is fertilizer for a fruiting vegetable. And remember, we said up, down, and the down means both the roots and the flowers, and of course also the fruit, which comes from the flower. This is an organic liquid all-purpose fertilizer concentrate, where all 3 numbers are the same and they're all pretty low. And here's another one where all 3 numbers are the same, but the numbers are higher because that is not an organic fertilizer. This is one that releases gradually over the several months. And so far as I know, there are, no or very few fertilizers that are time to release that are organic. Excuse me, I dropped my mouse. So I will stop that sharing. And what I want to do now, if I can, I'm going to try and share a different picture with you. This one. You recall that I said I was going to show you a page from the Territorial Seed Company catalog when we talked about the soil temperature. And besides that garden guide for the Rogue Valley, this is another place where you can find out what the best soil temperature is. One of the reasons I like the Territorial Seed Company catalog so much, whether you buy your seeds from them or not, I urge you to get the catalog, is because it's got this wonderful section at the beginning of every every section of a particular vegetable that explains how to grow that vegetable. And in this box are certain of the essential information you need to know when you're sowing seeds. So right here, the very first thing, soil temperature for germination. For beets, it should be between 50 and 75 degrees. Lower than that, you're probably not going to get good germination. Higher than that, you're probably not going to get good germination. So use your soil thermometer. This also tells you how deep to sow your seeds. In this case, a ½ inch deep. Tells you your seed spacing, which is 1 inch apart in this case. And it will take between 5 and 17 days before you start to see that little green seedling emerge. And after they've gotten pretty big, after they have maybe 2 or 3 true leaves, you're going to thin those plants out to between 3 and 4 inches in order to allow the proper spacing for those roots to develop. Ignore the row spacing. At least if you are growing in a raised bed or in a pot, ignore the row spacing. The row spacing shows you how far apart the rows should be if you're using some kind of mechanical cultivation. But if you're growing in a raised bed, the distance between your plants within the row and the distance between the rows can be exactly the same. Because for one thing, you can control the amount of fertilizer, the amount of organic material in your soil, so you have the optimum growing conditions. And because you're going to be weeding by hand in a raised bed rather than with some kind of mechanical cultivator. So, with that in mind, I would like to show you, demonstrate how to sow different kinds of seeds. And you may already know all of this, but when I've given other presentations, people seem to enjoy the demonstration. So I have 3 different packets of seeds here of different sizes. What I'm going to do is make a trench. And the depth of the trench depends in part on how deep I think those roots are going to go. And I'm going to add fertilizer. In this case, I'm adding this vegetable and tomato fertilizer. I put some of that in this little container, and I'm going to sprinkle it in here. And I'm going to use the amount of fertilizer that's recommended by the Territorial Seed Company catalog. In that beets page that I showed you, there were specific recommendations for the amount of fertilizer to use. And then I mix that into the soil. And then push that soil back to cover that fertilizer, because I don't want the seeds actually to touch the fertilizer. I want the roots to grow down. And when the roots grow down, then they'll find the fertilizer. And my soil should be moist. This is drier than I would ordinarily have it. Your soil should be moist enough that you can squeeze it, and it kind of holds a ball, but then it breaks apart pretty easily. So in this case, I'm going to sow beans. And by the way, this information about how deep to sow and how far apart is almost always on the seed packet. So in this case, it says to sow 1 inch deep. I'm going to make another trench in that same place where I put the fertilizer. And because the bean seed is really quite big, I'm sure you all know what bean seed looks like, I could just put it in my palm and just set them one by one in that trench according to the spacing that's recommended. And then, of course, I will just cover this up and keep it well watered so that those beans will start to germinate. Now, something that's a little bit smaller is turnip seed. Turnip seeds are these little round things. They're quite small. I still often pick them up one by one. It probably says to sow about 1/4 inch deep. So I'm going to make my trench about 1/4 inch deep. And I could do them one by one, but what a lot of people seem to like to do is to take an index card, just a plain card like this, make a crease in it, and put those seeds right there in that crease. And then take a pencil and kind of push them down one by one into that trench while moving along. I don't do that very well, but it really works well for folks who, I guess, got better dexterity than I do. You can buy all sorts of devices that are supposed to help with sowing seeds, but I've never found that they work particularly well. The last thing I'm going to show you is for carrot seed, because a lot of people seem to have trouble with sowing carrots. And there's kind of a trick to it. Again, make a shallow trench. But what I have here is some seed starting mix. It's very dry, very granular. You could use vermiculite, you could use sand. And I'm going to take about 1/8 teaspoon of carrot seed. Carrot seed is just very tiny, and people have a lot of trouble spacing it out properly. And it also takes quite a while to germinate, 10 to 15 days. And I'm going to put that small quantity of seed in a little cup of the seed starting mix or sand. And this is really too much, probably about 1/8 teaspoon of carrot seed in maybe 1/4 cup of something dry and granular like this. Then shake it up so that that carrot seed gets mixed up. And just shake it out all along the row. And that kind of spreads the seeds throughout that row that you just, where you just made that narrow trench or shallow trench, and just spread a little bit of soil over that, water it. Try and use a sprinkler without very much pressure so that you don't disturb the placement of the seeds. And then the trick is, because carrot seed likes to be kept very moist, take a sheet of newspaper, lay that right on top of your row, and water the newspaper. And just leave that newspaper there in place and keep watering every day. Keep that newspaper moist. That will keep the soil and the carrot seed underneath moist. And then you just kind of lift the edge of it every few days and see if that carrot seed is growing. And when you see little green sprouts, you take this off and you don't need the newspaper anymore, and your carrots should do pretty well from that point on. Okay, besides sowing seeds, the other way that you're going to get your vegetables is with starts that you need to transplant into your garden. And I think it's easiest, and certainly if you're a beginner, what I would recommend is to just buy vegetable starts from one of the local vendors and then transplant them into your own garden. You might want to start your own if you want some particular varieties that aren't readily available. So let me show you how to do that. These are some carrot seeds. I don't mean carrot seeds, lettuce starts. These are lettuce plants that I grew in these containers. And I need to lift it out, and I can use a plastic fork or this little gadget that I really enjoy using. It's called a widger, W-I-D-G-E-R. You can buy these online. They cost less than $10. And I use either the plastic fork or the widger to lift out my seedlings. They should have been better watered than this. You want to water very well your container that has your seedlings in it, and to water very well your soil that you're going to transplant them into. Again, you will make a trench, add the fertilizer, cover it up. Or if you're transplanting something that's going to be quite a distance apart, like kale or broccoli might be a foot apart, you're going to dig individual holes and put your fertilizer in the bottom of that hole. But in this case, I've got several lettuce plants all together in one group, and I'm going to very carefully just kind of pull them apart. Notice I am holding them by the leaf, or I could hold them by the stem. I mean by the roots. I do not want to hold them by the stem, and I'll show you that again in just a minute. And I make my hole and I firm the soil around it up to where those leaves are growing out of the base of the plant. Now I have some pepper plants, and I've got only one plant in each of the cells here. I'm going to lift that one plant out with the soil attached to it and with the roots as best I can. And again, notice I hold it by the leaves. I could touch the roots, but I do not want to grab the stem. The reason, of course, is if you damage a leaf, the plant can grow another leaf. If you damage the root, the plant can grow more roots. But if you destroy the stem, that's the end of the plant. And for peppers, tomatoes, and really just about any other plant, you can bury that all the way up to these first leaves here. So you're going to bury this stem that's below these first leaves. So make your trench or your hole that deep and then firm the soil around it. After you transplant, you may need to protect your transplants in one of several different ways. If you've got slugs, you probably want to add something like Sluggo or chick grit to try and discourage those slugs. If you've got little creatures like voles and cutworms, you can put a paper cup with the bottom cut out around the plant. Or if it's a bigger plant like squash, you might want to make a cage like this out of, this is hardware cloth with the squares are pretty small, so a vole can't get through it, and put that around the plant. You may also want to use bird netting to cover those plants and hope that the birds don't get them. You know, birds are known to pick peas and beans out of the soil, so as soon as you put them in the soil. So consider doing bird netting on top of them after you've sown them before they even start to germinate. So I encourage you, for more specific information about specific vegetables, to look at this document on the best veggies for the Rogue Valley. And notice that the order in which they are listed on here is not alphabetical order. It is in the order in which you would sow the seeds starting in January, or put transplants into the soil probably later in the spring, all the way through the fall, which is when you plant garlic. And I love to plant garlic. So I suggest that you use this as a guide to the best veggies, the easiest veggies for you to grow in the Rogue Valley. Where to get more information? Again, I recommend this garden guide for the Rogue Valley. You can buy it at any of the Grange co-ops anywhere in the Rogue Valley. You can also order it online to be mailed to you if you go to the Jackson County Master Gardener webpage. You can just Google Jackson County Master Gardener or jcmga.org. And on the home page, all the way on the upper right, it says shop, and click on that, and there will be directions for how to order it and have it mailed to you. The price of the garden guide is about $20. If you buy it, get it by mail, there's an additional $5 for the postage and handling. Also, go to the Jackson County Master Gardener homepage, and you will see a link to the plant clinic. Anytime you have a question about problems that you're having, for example, you have an insect that you can't identify or a disease on your plant that you can't identify, the plant clinic can help you figure out what that is and how to cope with it. And right now, plant clinic work is being done online rather than in person. But I asked them a question one time and I got an answer online within 2 or 3 days. It was really a great service. I encourage you also to keep your own records of what you grow and how you've grown them, and you can refer back to those year after year, and it's just another good way of knowing what to do from year to year. So again, I'm going to screen share. I will I'm sorry, I'm going to have to close that out and try and get what I really want to show you. Well, obviously I am going to have trouble getting it, so I won't bore you with my efforts to do that. But I will tell you. Keep records. I like to keep just a loose leaf notebook, and I use one page for every kind of vegetable I grow, and I just handwrite whatever information I think is useful, like what date I sowed, when the plant started to germinate, what the temperature was, how much fertilizer I used, and information like that. And then the next year, it's very easy for me to go back and see what I did and how successful I was. And if I was successful, repeat it again the next year. So that's one kind of record I like to keep. I also keep a diagram of all my raised beds, and I show exactly what I grew in which raised bed. But you can make it simpler than that. Just letter your raised beds or sections of your in-ground garden A, B, C, D, and say, okay, this year in bed A, I grew green vegetables like kale, and in B, I grew tomatoes, and in C, I grew beans, and in D, I grew corn. And then next year, be sure and move what you grew one year to a different bed, and keep rotating like that so that you don't put the tomatoes back in the same bed any sooner than the fourth year. You want to have 3 years in between when you planted similar vegetables in a particular bed. And the easiest way to do this is green vegetables versus root vegetables versus tomatoes, eggplant, peppers versus squashes. You'll be sure that you don't have the same families planted in the same beds in successive years if you do that. It's because certain soil-borne diseases like plants that are in the same family, and peppers and tomatoes and eggplant are related to one another. And so you don't want any of those to go back into the same bed year after year.